Our session today will be dedicated to the Holocaust, Genocide and Interfaith Dialogue, and it will be led by our lecturer, Jeremy Jones. And we also have our wonderful colleague, moderator, Venerable Lablu Barua from Bangkok, who will be our moderator today. So welcome everyone. And I would like kindly ask you to stay muted during the lecture. And after the lecture, which will last approximately 35 minutes, you will have a chance to ask your questions to our speaker. So it will be enough to raise your hand. You can see the option in reaction. So you just need to raise your hand and our moderator will ask you to ask our speaker directly. Or of course, you can also use our chat and leave your comments and questions in the chat. So, but please kindly stay muted during the lecture. And the session will be recorded and we will post this portion of the lecture online. So thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Rafał Pankowski from the Never Again Association.
Thank you. Well, let me repeat warm words of welcome on behalf of the Never Again Association as the organizer of this seminar. And I just wanted to encourage you to visit the Facebook page of Never Again under the title Respect Diversity, where you can find more information about this project supported by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And just recently we published the recording of the previous session, so you are very welcome to check it out, and we will post the address of the Facebook page in the chat. Now I just wanted to give the floor to our esteemed moderator, Venerable Lablu Barua, whom I think many of you know well already. Venerable Lablu is a PhD candidate at the International Buddhist Studies College in Thailand, and he's also a peace ambassador and a long-time good friend of the Never Again Association. This is the second lecture in our series, and I think it is also going to be very interesting. But I just want to pass the floor to Venerable Lablu, who will tell us a little more about our speaker and the topic. Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much, Professor Rafał Pankowski, co-founders of the Never Again Association, Polish sociologist and political scientist, for the introduce us of this project. Again, we welcome respected Buddhist monks, leaders, our respected guest speakers, and participants for the second sessions in the series of online meetings, the Holocaust, Genocide, Distortions, and Interfaith Dialogues. The meeting are hosted by the Never Again Association, its regional partners, with the support of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I am Venerable Lablu Tirasatu from Wat Pomrangsi Buddhist Monastery, Bangkok, Thailand, and a PhD candidate and IEP Peace Ambassador by the Institute for the Peace, Economics and Peace, Australia. I'm very honored to be moderate this series of meetings as a faith leaders. In the first meetings, we have learned about Jewish peoples and their religions and Judaisms. Today is the second in the series of Planet for meetings, and it will be about Holocaust, genocide, distractions, and interfaith dialogues. We invite everyone to attend all next meetings and participate active in discussions. Today lectures by our speaker of around 40 minutes, and then we have we'll have a discussions where our speaker will answer all of your questions. We have a very diverse audience today. If you would have any comment, questions, and idea, please share in the chat. So now we are going to introduce our speaker. Now I would like to introduce our honorable speaker, Mr. Jeremy Jones, for today's meetings. Jeremy Jones is Director of Internationals and of Community Affairs for the Australia, Israel, and Jewish Affairs Councils, and honorary life members and founder presidents of Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and a human rights advocate who has lectures and participate in high-level conference on human rights in more than 30 countries, represented the Australian governments and the World Jewish Congress. He chairs former interfaith dialogues in Australia while participating in international interfaith activity as a members of the International Jewish Committee for the Interreligious Conciliations. He nominated the People of Australia Ambassador in 2013 and 2014 by Australian government for his promote multiculturalism activities and provide feedback to the federal government of Australia. He was the 2007 winner of the Australian Human Rights Medal and the 2016 winner of the State of the New South Wales highest award for community harmony. He born in Melbourne and he has a graduate from Sydney University of History and Governments. He conduct significant research, wrote and review many books and articles. So we are very privileged and honored that one of the very expert human racisms, human rights and immigrations, Judaisms, interfaith dialogues and interrelationships and Australian history, political and regional extremisms expert is with us. And please, the floor is for our honorable speaker now.
Thank you. At the time we are speaking now, I feel that the world around us is in many ways frightening, not just because of the virus, the coronavirus, the pandemic. In Australia, there are many people who've come here in recent years from Afghanistan, and they're fearing in Afghanistan that if they belong to minority groups, they may well be victims of forms of genocide, of ethnic cleansing. If they're women who want education and full lives, they know what life was like in the past. And so as we're talking about the Holocaust and genocide and human rights abuses and interfaith dialogue, we have to be aware that there are forces around today which are very much against proper commemoration, honouring the dignity of human beings and respecting the sort of values that I think we are trying to promote as individuals and as a collective group through this lecture series and this program. I hadn't intended to begin that way. It's just there's a lot going on, as you can imagine, at the moment. But I was going to start this way, and I will now enter into telling a story to illustrate what I'm going to be talking about a little bit tonight. My family arrived in Australia. The first of my forebears arrived in Australia in 1858 from Manchester in England, but originally from Poland, from a small place called Blaszki, which is near Kalisz in Poland, for those who know the geography. They came to Australia in 1858. So in 2008, 150 years later, we had a family reunion. And it was wonderful to meet many people, a very diverse family, people of different backgrounds, had married people of different religions. It was a very nice, interesting mix of hundreds upon hundreds of relatives. But there was a board on display because the first member of my family to come to Australia was one of three brothers. One brother remained in Poland, one brother in Germany, while my great-great-grandfather had gone to England. So we saw the family tree, the hundreds, real hundreds of descendants of the two who came to Australia, the couple who came to Australia, the brother and his wife. Those who went to Germany, maybe a dozen still alive, probably even less. They were the only descendants of the brother who went to Germany. The brother who remained in Poland, zero. Every member of the family who remained in Poland had been murdered during the Holocaust. No one from that part of my family survived. Now, I'm unusual in the sense that, I live in Australia. My family was already in Australia. We had the benefit. But what we went through, what every Jewish family alive today has been through, is the knowledge that not that many years ago, in the times of some of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, there was a force on earth which had said that merely by being born Jewish, you were born with the death sentence. And I think that's very telling when we move forward with any of our discussions. We're not just talking about theoretical ideas. Some people have horrible ideas. Some people want to do things. They have bad dreams and intentions. The reality is, in this world, there have been people who have snuffed out entire lines, entire families. And, when I reflect on this, you reflect on what happened, how could this happen? And today we're not just talking about the Nazi Holocaust. We're talking about genocide, genocide distortion, interfaith dialogue. And I want to move, therefore, to discuss a little bit about genocide. But bear in mind what I was saying in the earlier lecture, that for centuries, Jewish people lived in different environments, but always as a very small minority. And very small minorities, or even larger minorities, are subject to the whims of the majority. You don't control your own destiny. You have to survive in circumstances which can be very difficult. Now, the word genocide, and I'm going to read a little bit, sorry. What is genocide? It's defined as an act committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The term first came into usage in 1944 by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish lawyer who later went to the United States of America. And his family, his descendants, talk about the dinner table conversation, where Raphael Lemkin was not talking only about what his family had been through, what the Jewish people had been through. He saw genocides accurately as having taken place elsewhere. He saw the genocide of Armenians by Turks was something of interest to him. Genocide in different parts of Africa, different parts of Asia. They were of interest because they conformed to a pattern. The intention by someone with power, because intention is one thing, but carrying out is the next thing, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, to destroy it in whole or in part. Now, Gregory Stanton, a scholar writing in the 1980s, saw 10 stages in genocide. How do you get to the stage of genocide? It's not that you wake up one morning with a community around you which is going to agree to decide that a child at birth has committed some sort of criminal act because of the group they're born into, or an elderly person who's led an exemplary life, someone who's never bothered you, who's never been on your radar when you've been looking at the world, suddenly deserves death. How do you get to this stage? And he came with Professor Stanton came with 10 points, which are used quite widely when people are looking at this question. The first, and again, it relates very much to our discussions in the previous session, is classification, dividing people into us and them, defining one group as being part of the family. One group that matters and another group which is either irrelevant or in opposition. You know, you don't care if they have any human rights, you don't care what happens to them, or they're in opposition to you. So for you to do well, they do badly, and the other way round, the classification. Then another stage is often the symbolization, making these people wear an item of clothing or carry some sort of social stigma because they belong to the other group, clearly marking people out as different. Discrimination is the next point, excluding groups from participating in the real society as you see it. So you can say some people might not be able to get the education. They might not be able to be in sporting teams. They might not be able to sell you products. But discrimination. In Nazi Germany, couldn't sit on park benches if you were a Jewish person. Then there's dehumanization. So first you're chipping away a little bit at their status, but then reducing them to no longer being considered human. Now, we humans are an arrogant species. We think we have better rights than other species on this earth. We say if you're a human being, you're entitled to certain rights. But if you're not a human, you don't have those rights. Now, we know in human history, and even today in a lesser extent, there's been slavery, there've been abuses. But nevertheless, human beings are a different category to other creatures. But if you dehumanize, you put one section of humanity outside those who are entitled to any sorts of rights. Organization is often another step. A state, a military force, generally a state, organizes in a way which allows them to act on their impulse. Polarization, trying to reinforce the idea that the group is different. Often, and it comes to an issue if I relate to the Jewish people, finding something in your particular cultural society and putting Jewish people, in this case, on the other side of the equation. So if it's a religious thing, you find a reason to say the Jewish people's religion means that they don't deserve to be considered human. If it's a tribal thing, you know, we're a national group, Jews cannot be part of this group no matter how much they try, they weren't born into it. When it came to the Nazis, it became another level, a racial group. You had it wasn't about what you did. It wasn't about matter where you lived. It was a concept of not one sort of creature, one sort of being called a human and non-humans. It's within humanity, some idea of race, saying there's some genetic features, inherited genetic features, which separate people into different sections, and some deserve to be separated. Then there's preparation, getting ready to do these acts. There's persecution, which is sometimes incarcerating people, sometimes it's setting up ways to kill them. And then there's extermination, the actual murders, the actual killing, the actual destruction of the group. And the 10th stage that Stanton identifies is denial, which I'll come to a bit later. But if we understand the idea of a genocide being a process, we understand the Holocaust being a process, we understand that before the Nazis were able to kill Jews, were able to sell their ideas, promote their ideas, act on their ideas, they had to go through various stages to allow this to happen. It wasn't as if there was a group that woke up one morning, had an evil idea and carried it out. No, it was a process. And I must say, some years ago, the government of Sweden hosted the Stockholm Forum on the Prevention of Genocide, and they were looking at warning signals. They're saying, when have various regimes reached certain points, which means the rest of the world has a responsibility to act and to protect, and using symbols not exactly these, but pretty close to these. So this is some of the background. Now, when it came to the Jewish experience, as I mentioned earlier, there could be a religious justification, a national justification, a racial justification. But the most important thing was the Nazis themselves were able to promote an idea to enough people to be then able to enforce that on others who might not have agreed, but certainly were not going to be in a position sometimes to do anything about it. But they were able to promote an idea which would seem insane if you're objective. The idea of a small minority, which for many hundreds of years had not been able to do anything except survive, was somehow some powerful force which was responsible for terrible things that happened to others and happened to you. It's nonsensical, but it worked in the sense that there were people who would accept this idea and people who would act on this idea. And the context also, the context of the Nazi Holocaust included experiences of Jews in a number of places, which has led a number of scholars to have the idea that the Nazis may have been the people who carried out the genocide, but there were other people who may have done it or done something similar in the future if the Nazis had not. I heard a story when I was in Kiev visiting the site of the Babi Yar Memorial, that when the Nazis came into Ukraine, the Jewish people, or many Jewish people, believed suddenly there were these cultured, educated Western Europeans, and their life could not possibly be as miserable as it was under the people who had been ruling them at the time, and were willing to go along with the idea that, yes, they were going somewhere better because their life had been so bad. I've been told by survivors of the Nazi Holocaust in some countries that they remember well before the Nazi Holocaust that the Christian festival of Easter was a time where they were scared to leave their homes because of incitement against them coming from the priest. Now, you know, these were people who were playing with their others in the playground normally, and the children, and the next day they find suddenly they're people who are the enemies of society because of the alleged crime of killing the God or killing Jesus. So there was that sort of atmosphere in which the Nazis were able to find some what people described as willing executioners. Because something that's often forgotten when we talk about genocide or move to the side is that human beings carried it out. It wasn't as if aliens arrived from another planet without human experiences and emotions and the ability to learn and educate and live. One group of human beings, or one collective of human beings, was able to target and commit genocide against another. Human beings. Horrific stories that we've all possibly heard about those who've been involved in terrible crimes against humanity during the day. Then they go home to their family and they pat their dog and have a nice day. You know, it was a day at the office to be involved in these crimes. It's not unique to one area of genocide. But it's when we're trying to think about what happened, I think it's quite important. When it comes again to the question, when it comes to the question of the Holocaust and what happened, you know, it's not something which I could go through in any great depth in the short time available. There are probably people on this call who have taught courses on the Holocaust. You know, it's something which has so much scholarship done already and so much more to be done. In fact, my understanding is all events of history, it is the one about which most research and study has been done for a number of reasons. One of the reasons, I think, is because it was such a momentous event in the history, certainly of the West. Another is because there were people who would challenge the history. And so there's a response to that. If you're challenged with proof, you attended, if you're a serious scholar, to try and investigate and find out what you can and document what you can. Now, in some genocides, sometimes when we learn about genocide, we have sketchy information. Sometimes it's because the societies were not very good or interested in documenting, or were very good at hiding their crimes. Sometimes a very successful genocide does not leave witnesses. If everybody is killed, you're able to protect your awful secret. This happens. But as it was during the Nazi genocide, there were many places, it wasn't universal, but many places where there was very good documentation. Documentation of German troops and the allies of the German troops, counting how many bullets were expended in killing people on a particular day. Records of trains transporting people to be killed. These sort of documents existed. But also because of the societies in which it took place, in many of the countries, there was documentation about lives. So for instance, in some countries, the telephone directory told you about the human beings who lived in a certain place at a certain time. If those people were no longer there, what happened? In other places, there were insurance policies. Somebody had a policy which had the name, the details of the family, and then that helped people understand and know what went on. But also the Nazis themselves and some of their allies didn't seem to be ashamed at all of what they were doing. So they were documenting. Others were more concerned, but there were some who wanted to document. And again, this is a really interesting feature when we remember human beings committing these acts and then thinking that the historical record might reflect well on them, well enough. If they are victors and they get complete victory, they wanted to shout from the roofs how successful they had been. Now, because we have time for questions afterwards, I don't want to say much more on this point because I really do want to concentrate more on the discussion part of this evening. But I've mentioned a little bit, as I said, a little bit of background to help you understand what we're talking about in the Nazi Holocaust and genocide. And as I said, there is so much written about it. You're able to follow your particular academic or other interest down particular channels, and there'll be plenty to support your work there. But I wanted to say what happens after genocides. What happens after genocides? Well, some people will justify. And I know very well that I have to mention a perspective I have as an Australian. After the end of the Second World War, in which the Nazi genocide took place, Australia was a country which took large numbers of immigrants from Europe. We took not that many Jewish survivors, but certainly many people who were simply trying to get a better life from the poverty of war-destroyed Europe, and many people, unfortunately, who had been involved in crimes against humanity, who were Nazis, who came to Australia because they thought they could escape and live out here comfortably, or people who had been fighting, at least on an intellectual side, who agreed with the Nazis and did not want to live in post-Nazi Europe, particularly places where the communists were able to do what they wanted to those who'd been on the other side during the war. And there were organizations in Australia made up of some of these groups, some of these communities, who would justify the Nazi Holocaust in the language of the perpetrators. So they would say, yes, in a particular village, there were 1,000 Jews before the Holocaust and there were none at the end. But that's because it is known the Jews were Bolsheviks. The Jews stood for some political ideology. Now you try to ask the next question. The newborn babies had a political ideology you didn't agree with? Elderly men and women, people who had never shown any interest in politics, you could justify murdering them because you thought they were Bolsheviks, or acting on an impulse that said something else bad about the particular group. Now, I'm talking, as I said, I've been emphasizing the Nazi Holocaust, but the principle extends in many other parts of history. You know, there's a group that's against us. Our survival technique is genocide, is murdering every member of this group. So there's the justification. Then there's the denial. It's not that some people will deny the facts. They will say, no, there were not murders of these particular people. They all moved to other countries, or they died of natural causes, or there was a lot of poverty during the Second World War, and there was terrible famine, and everybody died, and that's what we had. And so these so-called victims are really people who've created something. They've made something up. They have a fantasy, and they want you to pay for it. They want you to feel guilty about it. They want you, if you're in a country which was part of the genocidal circle, Nazi Germany, and particularly Germany, pay reparations. So these people didn't really suffer. They just want something from you. That sort of denial. Denial that it was anything other than a war. Playing with numbers. There are many who play with numbers. They say, you say that there were X number of hundreds of thousands or millions murdered in a particular place or time. Well, our evidence shows that it was a smaller number. Therefore, you've made everything up. You have that, and unfortunately, it's real, and it's far more common than one would like to think. It hasn't entered into the academy in most places, but every so often, one aspect or the other will gain some prominence. Probably the individual who had most prominence of taking a document, extracting one sentence out of context and making this into a case against the Jewish people was a British writer, David Irving, who actually sued an academic, Deborah Lipstadt, who had described him as a Holocaust denier, and he lost in court. He had sued her for making that allegation. He's the most high profile, but it's well beyond him, and it's well beyond the Nazi Holocaust. Now, Walter Reich, when he was writing about the issue of the Holocaust denial, said, and again, I'm reading this because I want it to be accurate, the primary motivation for most deniers, and we're talking about the Nazi Holocaust, is anti-Semitism. And for them, the Holocaust is an infuriatingly inconvenient fact of history. After all, the Holocaust has generally been recognized as one of the most terrible crimes that ever took place, and surely the very emblem of evil in the modern age. If that crime was a direct result of anti-Semitism taken to its logical end, then anti-Semitism itself, even when expressed in private conversation, is inevitably discredited amongst most people. What better way to rehabilitate anti-Semitism, making anti-Semitic arguments seem once more again respectable in civilized discourse, and even make it acceptable for governments to pursue anti-Semitic policies, than by convincing the world the great crime for which anti-Semitism was blamed simply never happened. Indeed, it was nothing more than a frame-up invented by the Jews and propagated by them through their control of the media. Now, this observation, again, is not unique to the Nazi Holocaust. It is saying the group who you were against, who is accusing you of genocide, they're actually the guilty ones. They're the people who don't deserve to be listened to or accorded the standing in any discussion or debate, because they would make up some horrific accusation against you. And I think that might be the most extreme, the denial, but then we move on to reframing. Now, think for a moment what we know about genocide, what we know about different genocides. Think what we know about human beings. We're talking civilian populations, talking about children, elderly, men, women, regardless of politics, social standing, who are targeted for destruction because of the group to which they belong. That's what we're talking about. These are the people, and we know what it means. Now imagine if somebody comes along with an argument and says, wait a moment, this was a terrible crime, but look at what happened in our circumstance. In our circumstance, we found that there were terrible crimes committed against us, that there were civilians killed, there was persecution, discrimination, and yes, there was genocide against you, but let's also call genocide what happened to us. Let's extend the term. Let's talk about equality of crimes. Let's make everything equally genocide. Now, I don't think it's very useful as scholars, as serious students of history, to make like a league table of suffering, to say this person suffered more than that one, or this was a bigger crime, or this one. That doesn't help. It's good to appreciate what is in common with crimes, and also to appreciate for their own these crimes, these genocides. But there are malicious people, and again, with political agendas, who see it to be very valuable to try and make it as if there isn't a single distinguishing factor between somebody who discriminates on one level and somebody who will commit crime, to somebody who will have an opinion, to somebody who will have an action, to somebody who will act in a very limited way, in a smaller area, and do something very wrong. I'm not saying there haven't been many wrongs committed by many people against many people, and saying this is exactly, the same as what you've been through. It never is, and it's never a useful discussion, and far too often it's very political. Now, I hope I've left you with lots of questions. I haven't been scrolling down my chatters yet, but they will come. But there was a third part to the topic I was asked to address in this session, as well as the Holocaust and genocide distortion, as if these are not all huge subjects on their own. And that was interfaith dialogue. Now I was thinking, how does interfaith dialogue come into this? And it comes in a number of ways. First, try to imagine, if you can, put yourself in the head of a person who believes in a God, a good God, a God who acts in the interests of humanity, a father figure, a protector. And then you see that some of the children of that father are killing other children of that father. Some members of the human family, some of God's created human beings, are killing others. And even worse, they're doing so, in some cases, either without being challenged by those who claim to believe in a good God and claim to be ethical and claim to hold high values, in their context where they are there and not acting, or sometimes even in the name. As I referred to earlier, the case of people who knew that others were out to get them because of a belief that they were guilty of a religious crime, a challenge to the God, as it is in the case of the story I was relating to about Easter. So you have the challenge of what you were doing. Why weren't they acting? Why were religious organizations not able to create a society which would not let this happen? Why were Christians overwhelmingly not the people standing up against the Nazi Holocaust? What did it tell you about God? What did it tell you about the world? These were serious theological challenges. And I have to say that the main Christian churches, not always at the same time, and it's not as if one's gone here and the others followed, but in different ways, many of the main Christian churches in Europe have had reckonings. They've tried to think about what this means. The most significant, to my mind, by a long shot, was the Catholic Church, with the discussions at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, in the mid-1960s, where they reframed the relationship between the Catholic Church and Jewish people to break away the barrier of Jews somehow being outside the human family, outside certainly the community of those who deserved and were justified in rights. But the World Council of Churches and many of its constituent members also dealt with this question. It was a challenge, but it wasn't only a challenge for Christians. Clearly, for Jewish people, asked enormous questions. but it challenges people of any faith, people who try to understand the world. What happened? How was there the Nazi Holocaust? How are there other genocides committed by people who are raised in religious environments? And I'm not saying, they were the only people involved, but if you're teaching anything, if there's any meaning to the values you're promoting from religion, how can people murder others simply because of your idea of the group they belong to? It's a great challenge for faith. It's a barrier for many people to accept the idea of a divine force which is acting for the good. Now, obviously, it's different in different religious understandings of cosmology. I'm not saying everybody feels the same way by any means, but certainly about trying to raise human beings to be good people is a challenge. Forget other questions. I mean, because we deal with ourselves in the Jewish community, where people are thinking, what does this mean? How could this happen if there is a good God? What does it mean? And I can go into it in a small way in discussion if necessary. But that's one aspect of how the Holocaust and genocide play a part in people's religious relationships. If my religion was teaching me something bad about another group, I might not think about it. But when I see the real world consequences, I have to think about it. It means something. So what do you do? When we talk about interfaith dialogue, we're talking about a whole family of different ideas. The first idea of interfaith dialogue is someone of one religion talking to someone of another religion, one faith, another faith, one belief system, another. You come together and you hear from each other. That's on simple grounds. It's a purely human encounter between different individuals who are able to express hopefully informed opinions, but certainly authentic opinions, and you can have a discussion. And it can mean something, it might not mean anything. Sometimes I joke there are various groups who we nickname the picnic clubs. They like to go out with picnics with people of different religions. They might not even talk about religion, but because they're from different groups doing it together, it already has some sort of role. There are others for whom dialogue is only interesting when it is intense. When you're in a room with people who are very committed to representing a faith in opposition to another, challenging. And it can be. I have been involved in a range of different dialogues, and it's really good and interesting and challenging when your belief, the way you see the world, is challenged by somebody who has a different understanding entirely, and you can learn from each other. In dialogue, though, there are more meaningful dialogues, I would say, than some of these. And one is the dialogue which is designed at helping people understand the common humanity of each of us. And again, this is something which wouldn't have interested a lot of people until after something as horrific as the Nazi Holocaust. There have been other horrors, which I'll mention in a second, but with the Nazi Holocaust. So what do I mean by a common project? Well, sometimes, again, if I use an Australian context, you're talking about a social problem that everybody wants to solve. But instead of people solving it by themselves, you work together to solve it. So in Australia, we had a history of tens of thousands of years of Indigenous Australians, sometimes called, for those using an old term which is not used, Aborigines, but the Indigenous Australians living in the country. There was European colonial settlement beginning in the late 18th century and until the late 20th century. There were very few attempts to reconcile the two parts of Australia, the Indigenous community and those who came as part of the European colonization and many subsequent immigrations, the immigrants versus them. There was a project of reconciliation. It was backed by the government, but it wasn't really going anywhere until somebody had the bright idea of having a working group of religions. And so people from every religious background we could find eventually, and that included Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, Baha'is, Sikhs, people representing indigenous theologies itself. People came together and said, we as people who want a society based on values can be working together. And we developed a week of prayer, which became the Reconciliation Week, which became a whole process of learning and education. And the engine room of developing that relationship were people of different faiths working together. There was also something which expanded from this into Southeast Asia. And what happened is in Australia, we had a working group of people of different religions. And the first time it became publicly noticed was almost exactly 20 years ago. Now, 20 years ago, in a week or so, some of us on this call were at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, which is not the subject of the discussion, but it's when I met Rafał Pankowski, so it was a clearly memorable occasion. But a few days after were the attacks on in the Twin Towers in New York, known in shorthand as 9/11, the 11th day of the 9th month, 11th of September, the Twin Towers attack. Now, in many Western countries, there was an enormous shock. It was almost unbelievable. There was mass trauma. There was a feeling that our societies were under attack. And people were not necessarily very rational in their responses. It wasn't as if there were armies everywhere doing things, but the fear factor was enormous in many societies. And what we did in Australia, which was quite interesting, is the Jews, Christians, and Muslims together, but then with the invitation to other groups, organized a prayer for our common humanity, because there was fear of fear. We were worried that unless people did something about it, there was going to be such a feeling of alienation from each other and enmity, and people saying this person's a Muslim, therefore they're the enemy, or somebody saying this person represents the West, therefore whatever it might be. We got together and worked out that there was a lot of people out there who simply wanted to feel that there was a counter force to the evil of terrorism, or the evil of war, or the evil of genocide. And we did our best to promote this. But shortly after that, we developed a public regular dialogue. And out of that grew the Asia Pacific Regional Interfaith Dialogue. And again, what was really interesting in this dialogue is when it began, its first meeting was in 2004. The idea was people from all the countries in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN nations, plus Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, would send delegates representing the religious diversity of their countries. And they would meet together and they'd try and build a counter to religion as being publicly identified with the extremism of Al-Qaeda, for example. At the first meeting, I wasn't at the first meeting, but I was at subsequent meetings, and I know a lot that happened at that first meeting. There were many people in their own countries who didn't know each other. There might be a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, different organizations working on a similar program, for instance, alleviation of poverty, housing issues, migrants, but they'd never thought of working with each other in various countries. They weren't aware of the concept of working together for common humanity and common understanding. Between the first and the second meeting, there were the tsunamis in Asia, the horrible deaths caused by the ocean tidal waves. And when we had the second meeting, people said, before that first meeting, when we went to help and save, we would have seen the group of the other religions as competition. But because we had the opportunity to talk to each other, we realized that they're not trying to save a person just so they convert them to their religion. They're trying to save them because they want to save a life, which is what we want to do. So we'll sort out our religion afterwards. You know, we'll be the opposite to Superman. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Western concept of the Superman hero, the comic character now in the movies, of somebody who walks around in normal clothes and then goes and changes into his cape and has superpowers, saves the world, then comes back out of his costume and re-enters normal society and people don't know. We were the opposite in Interfaith Dialogue. You're the opposite. You go in your Superman costume as your Buddhist or your Jew or your Muslim, whatever. You take it off and just be a person without any baggage. You solve the problem and then you go out and then you can have your discussion afterwards. And I think that is when I feel interfaith dialogue or interfaith discussions are having a purpose. And again, it comes back to the issue we were starting with genocide and distortion. If you come to know somebody, if you can have a conversation with someone, and I don't mean just living next door or seeing somebody when you're on a walk or being in the same football team even necessarily, but actually coming to know somebody, to try and get a feeling for how they feel, you will suddenly, it changes the context, the content of your conversation. It changes the way you would approach issues such as whether or not you're happy with this other group being discriminated against, separated, defamed, doesn't mean anything to you. I can tell you, I've seen, again, using Australian examples, because they're the ones I've known best, some very real examples of how this can work. And again, we're not talking about saving people from genocide. That's big picture stuff. And you'd need others than me to talk about it at some sort of depth. But think for a moment. Some years ago, we had a politician in Sydney, in my city, who said that Muslim women should not be able to wear the hijab, should not be able to wear a scarf. You can see the face, but they should not be able to because it separates them from the rest of the community. It's an un-Australian action. We had a meeting and the Jews and the Christians said to the Muslims, don't talk to the media. We will. We will be the ones who say that Australia is a place where there's religious tolerance. These people aren't doing anything to upset us. So it's no longer the targeted group versus the majority. It's the majority versus the person doing the targeting, changing the dynamics. And again, when you look at some of the acts of heroism against genocide, often successful in the small scale. I mean, I said how bad some things have been in the world, but there could have been even many more and even worse in many situations. It's because people have been willing to say we cannot have the template of the racist versus their victim. It has to be everybody versus the racist if you don't believe that it's right to have a society where some people feel they have rights, some people are humans and others are not. Now, I know I should say a lot more, and I was going to. I think I should just conclude where I began, though, in one sense, and that's about the success in a sense of interfaith dialogue, but the challenges it can present. I began by talking about what's going on in Afghanistan. Many of the Afghani people I know in Australia, they're Muslims. I've met them through dialogue. I've met them through interaction in my country and come to know them to an extent that what they are going through, their fears, really affect me. I'm sharing their fears. And I'm not unique. I'm the person speaking to you, but I'm not the only person by any means who's been through some of these processes of learning and understanding. And I want you to all think in your own circumstances, how much better you would feel in reality and how much better it would be if you knew there were people who had an understanding of what you were going through because of who you happen to be in particular circumstances, getting a genuine understanding, which can be arrived at through genocide. Now, I've watched the clock, and I'm sorry I've spoken for longer than I was going to. I see questions, and I'll now, if that's okay with our chairman and our other advisors, our other hosts, I think we can move on to questions.
So thank you so much again, our honorable speakers, for your wonderful lectures today. And it is our great privilege, and we have a very good chance to reflect on the history of Jews and genocide, Holocaust, and interfaith from your lectures. And you've given us a lot of history, even the present situation of the Afghan, what is going to on, and how your personal experience to move from the Poland to the Australia, and how is interconnected with the Judaism history and also the Holocaust history to in your life. And you are carrying uncomfortable, which is called true peace and happiness and harmony to the around the world. So we are very, very honored. And again, thanks for you to join with us and giving the wonderful lectures in this session, to the sessions. And now I would like to our audience and participants to give the floor who want to ask questions to our honorable speakers. And I also humbly request our participants, the last sessions, which is on the 10th of August happens, this first meeting in our Facebook page, Never Again Association Facebook page, and also Holocaust and Educations, the face page, and also in international Never Gains Remembrance. This page, we have a many page, and also share with our page, so you can watch from there and you can make comment, and then we can discuss about this comment with the next meeting. So this is our request to watch this video, first video, and also this video will be going to the next week in our the page Never Again Associations. So now I am going to give our honorable participants and to the all you to be the floor is for you. If you have any question, raise your hand and you can directly ask to the questions to our honorable speaker. And I see the one questions from here, one of the venerable Buddhist monks, Venerable Shumananda. Shumananda, are you is there now? Hello? Venerable Shumananda, can you hear me? Hello, we cannot hear you. Please mute up your.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Venerable Samananda is living in Bodh Gaya, India, and he's a spiritual master, and he have a very intellectual knowledge and also interfaith dialogues, because he is working in India, where is the many faith and many beliefs people living there. So please ask your questions to our honorable speakers.
So thank you, Venerable Lablu, for this great opportunity. And also I'm very happy to and very delighted to join these programs. So I have a question to our speakers, Mr. Jonas. I want to know, he already briefly shared it with us about Holocaust, genocide, also about the interfaith dialogue. So actually in the globally, lot of uncertainty, war and genocide is happening. So I have the question to Mr. Jonas, who is the responsible for this problem?
Thank you. This is one of the great questions that is challenging all of us who try and think about this question. The simple answer is human beings. The human beings who murder come from the same background where they are human beings who murder and human beings who are murdered. They're human beings who persecute and human beings who are persecuted. Now, that doesn't mean that every human being that there's no difference. Obviously, there are some people who will do some things and others who don't. Hopefully, they never would, certainly don't have the power. So then we ask ourselves, all right, where are sources? How do people justify their actions which would appear to be crimes against humanity? Now, it seems, if you were studying this from a point of view of anthropology, you might look at the view and say there were tribes, there were small groups, family groups, clans, they were in competition for food, competition for the environment, control over a particular area. They came in conflict with each other and they wanted to find justification. They wanted to find justification which was something greater than just, they want something I want, I don't want them to have it, I'm strong enough to survive or get their thing. They wanted to give it some sort of philosophical base as time progressed, and would find reasons, all sorts of reasons. Sometimes, as I mentioned, it could be religion. Sometimes they would say, because these people do not accept my religion, they will never be my equal, they are a threat to me, they're a threat to the people for whom I feel part, and therefore I am only defending myself by committing horrible acts. Because it's actually really interesting how often people who talk about, who are the intellectual drivers at the early stages of discrimination, persecution, and genocide portray themselves as victims. They say, this person is doing something to me which is wrong. This person is threatening me. Therefore, I have to act in defense. I don't think it happens that often where people just say, I have the power. I can do it, therefore I'm going to do it. They want to justify it beyond that. They want to give it some basis. So you have a huge range of different sources that people draw upon to justify this. When it comes to, moving on to global actions, nations sometimes behave like the worst of human beings. They say, what are our interests as a collective? What is our national interest and how does that compete with somebody else? I mean, we have seen, there's a pandemic at the moment, and we've seen some countries do what they can to get vaccinations, medicines, the best care, oxygen, whatever, in competition with other human beings. Because they have the strength, the power, they can do it, they do it. Because they're not thinking in terms of humanity, they're thinking in terms of their own little section of humanity as represented by the country. Now, you don't have to be a scientist to know that it doesn't really help the world if there are some places where the virus can still prosper and grow just because you're somehow protected from it in your own environment through a vaccination or a lifestyle. It's a very short-sighted way of seeing things. It's like the environment. It's very short-sighted to think that your part of the planet can be protected from the rest of the planet rather than addressing it on a global level. So you do have nations behaving that way, and unfortunately you have individuals.
Hello, yes, we have more questions.
Okay,
we have more questions.
In other words, all right, I'll just conclude here. But you will have people who, for short-term political gain, weaponize discrimination, hatred against others, and for short-term political gain, do horrific acts. And I'm sorry about the length of the answer, but you asked a very big question, Venerable.
Hello, can you hear me? So our next question come from another participants from Jitiaria Bhikkhu. He's a student of the Mahachulalongkorn Buddhist University. Please, you give your just questions quickly.
Mr. Professor, I want to know what is different between Holocaust and genocide.
All right, so the Nazi Holocaust is generally used as a term to refer to the time of the murder of Jewish people by the Nazi Germany with the action during the course of the Second World War, that time period. Genocide is a general term which can include a number of different mass murders, destructions of particular groups. So that's the difference.
Thank you.
We cannot hear.
Hello, Faisal, can you hear us? Hello?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, please ask your questions to our honorable speaker.
Okay, sure. Professor Jeremy, I have a question that I posted on the chat box. That is that interfaith dialogues are indeed necessary to mitigate a conflict, but will it be efficacious in dealing with Holocaust denial or Holocaust deniers?
Yes, it's a very difficult question. But the first thing is, imagine that you are not convinced you can ever change the mind of a Holocaust denier. If somebody has decided this is what they're going to do, so your target audience becomes the person that Holocaust denier might reach or influence. And I think with many groups, credibility is important. If a speaker comes to your group and you don't know them, they mean nothing to you, they're from a community where you've had a history of conflict, and they try and say something, you will not take that nearly as seriously, or you won't believe it as much as if it comes from somebody from within your group. So the more people who are educated through dialogue to think of the problem of Holocaust denial and genocide as being their problem because they're part of the human family, rather than just the problem of the victim group, the more chance you have of being able to have more people involved in this effort to talk for historical truth and for moral decency.
So thank you so much, our speakers, and also our Faisals. So next question from the Cambodia. She is also the Holocaust genocide, working on the Holocaust genocide. Basil, right? Am I right? Basil, right?
Yes,
So Basil will be asked questions to our honorable speaker now.
So thank you so much, Professor Jeremy Jones. So your speech is very touching and very interesting to me, and I'm still young, I'm still learning and read the book. And yes, I am a generation of genocide of Cambodia, because during my father's time, it was genocide time, and as my generation, the genocide is end, but it doesn't mean that it's end, because it's still holding in every Cambodian hearts, and they still overcome in this, still holding and traumatized in this consequence. So my question is, what is the role of religion contribute to the peace building in humanity, and start from where and how? And this is the first question regarding to the relations. And the second question is about giving the meaning of the genocide. So what does that mean when we talk about the genocide? Can we give the same definition of genocide in Asia, in Africa, and in Europe? Because in a different context, different language, different culture and traditions, and why make people actually reach to the stage where they have the motivation to kill one another? Because to me, I believe that human beings are born with the kind heart, with the open heart. Normally, it's not that easy to reach to the stage where you can brave enough to carry the weapon and kill one another, or kill somebody alive. You know, this is such a big decision, and in a way which is hard to believe that people kill people. And for example, such a Cambodia, we don't have that diversity which is compared to India, Bangladesh, Nepal, another country which is ethnicity was totally separate based on tradition, race, and you know, the culture of costumes and kind like that. We're Cambodian, we all Cambodian. We speak the same language. We not even speak different language. We 90% are Buddhism, and Buddhism represent which is a religion which, if we don't call ourselves as a religion as a Buddhism, we call Buddhist as a philosophy which fit the way of people are living. But what motivates us to have such act like a very cruel, like a wild creature, where attack one another, and you know, if a wild creature, you know, you attack one another because you have to get food for eat, for surviving. But we are human beings. what such a motivator to kill one another and throw it away? To me, it's very waste. And then connect what is why we sing and why we read in Bible. I still don't understand. I mean, when I read the history, I don't understand what exactly it is. So since you have such a very
Okay, thank you so much for your questions. Please, our honorable speaker.
They're very complex and difficult questions, but I'll do my best with them. Your last question, your last point is, I feel the way you feel. To me, it is unnatural. A human being would kill another human being. It just doesn't make any sense to me. What would you have to, where would you have to be? On what planet, on what intellectual plane would you have to be where you think you have the right to kill another human being? But then I meet people who are stunned that I want to meet with people from other religions and other backgrounds and want to talk to them. Say, what do you have in common with them? You're who you are, you're part of a particular group, and that's the interest you should have. So we have a planet where there are some people who can't understand why people would be evil, some who can't understand why people would be kind, and then many others in between. You have a full gamut of humanity with attitudes on these questions. But in many cases, it boils down, you raised the question, you said, animals might kill each other for food or to survive. When people frame their existence as being threatened by another part of humanity, when they think of themselves or their group as having its success depend on another group not having success, you begin to lay the seeds of genocide, certainly of discrimination. Some people, there are political genocides. I mean, you referred to one. It wasn't racial. It wasn't religious. It was political. One group had a political philosophy which justified for it getting rid of its enemies. We know there have been political philosophies where a human being, individual, has been expendable for the greater good of the state. Sometimes people are happy to be part of that. Other times, the person has no choice. You're expendable. You're part of the survival of the greater mechanism. And and you talk about values, and it comes to your question about religion. There are plenty of people for whom religion, for whom philosophy, for whom faith, whose belief brings them to a position of trying to be the best human being they can be, of being conscious, of not being a good human being. Sometimes a concern, well, what would happen next in an afterlife or reincarnation? Others, because their understanding is it's the wrong thing to do and they're being educated in a way which teaches you it's a very wrong thing to do, to treat other human beings as no longer human beings. But again, it comes back. We know there are people who use religion as an identity marker, and they use the identity marked out by religion in opposition to people of other faiths and other backgrounds, and they justify it. Sometimes it's jealousy. Sometimes they want an asset, they want something material held by members of another group, and that's the way they can get it. Sometimes it's because of a philosophy, again, who is in our group, who has the right to survive and benefit, and who is in our way, who is an obstacle to our own physical or our own entitlements. So these are, this is one of the problems, that it would be lovely, wonderful to believe that everybody who had a particular philosophy, who was taught a political philosophy as being right, would come to the same conclusion about how they should act towards others. But that has not happened. Generally, when it does happen is when people are educated a particular way, they have good role models, they see people live in good ways, and they see a successful life. But imagine if you are in an environment where people who are not respecting any basic civilized behavior, like people who would rob, people who would murder, people who would rape, they have the power and advantage, and you're just an ordinary person, not a deep thinker, you might say, this is the way, that's the way of the world. Powerful people don't need to respect or should respect others. And that might be depressing, but it's a sad reality of some of the factors we face in the world. Now, when you asked about genocide, I read at the beginning the definition of genocide, which is used in the Genocide Convention. There is a UN convention for the prevention and punishment of the crime of by the United Nations. It came into power in 1948. It was moved in 48 and came into power in 1951. So they define various acts as genocide, which are killing members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So that's what genocide is defined as. Now, it can be used, there are many different contexts in which it's going to be relevant using that definition. But I think at the United Nations, certainly at the time, the idea was to try and make it broad enough that it would apply in different contexts and different circumstances. Now, I know you asked other questions about religions building peace and humanity. There's a line that we often use when we're talking about the Jewish religion. And they say religion can either be a poison or the antidote to the poison. The same the same person with the same religion can learn something which either is going to be harmful or is going to be positive. The question is how religions individually and together can make religion, can make faiths, can make lifestyles, philosophies a blessing to others and not just to the individual. And even an individual does not consider themselves to be blessed if they are part of a humanity which is doing dreadful things and they are not acting. So I hope that went some way towards answering your very complex and complicated questions.
So thank you so much, our honorable speakers. Now, next questions from our venerables, Simo Sraman. He is also a master degree student of Mahachulalongkorn Buddhist University in Thailand. Please ask your questions to our honorable speaker.
You have to do unmute your speaker, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Venerable Lablu Barua. And also I would like to thank a prominent speaker by whom I got lots of knowledgeable information on themes. So with kind permission, I have two questions. I have two questions to distinguished speaker. One is, what is the concept of a wise companion from the point of Jewish view? And second question is, among those who are concerned, wise, experienced, and rational in Jewish perspective, what is their emphasis as a good companion, as having a profound influence on individual development and social integrity? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we say in Judaism that there's a question posed: who is wise? A wise person is somebody who is learning from others all the time. A wise person is somebody who is accepting they do not have the answers. It's a constant journey to get more knowledge, to get more understanding. Now, a wise person will help you on your path. They will challenge you. They will make you think. A wise person is also someone, there's more than one level sort of wisdom. There's wisdom about how to get by in life, a practical person. It's always very useful to have practical people around you. But a wise person is also somebody who looks at a situation and doesn't make a judgment on what should I do right now based on what is in front of them, but they're thinking towards the future. In one of the Psalms, part of the Jewish religion in our Bible, which I showed last week, there is a book called the Book of Psalms, a book of, I suppose, poetic songs could be another term for it. There is a line that without vision, the people will perish. And that line is often interpreted to say, if you are not trying to envisage what the future world will look like, you're not going to have a sustainable existence. A wise person is looking ahead, and a wise companion will help you think about what sort of world you want and hopefully guide you in that particular direction. But there are also books in our Bible, books in our holy books, which are talked about as wisdom books, where we see the recorded wisdom, recorded ideas of people who lived many centuries, thousands of years ago, who were able to make observations of life, which we thought were important enough to teach and continue to convey the message. And today, there's a figure in the Jewish religion that many of you will have come across called a rabbi. A rabbi has a status. A rabbi is a teacher. You become a rabbi by study. You don't become a rabbi the way in some religions you become a minister of religion because you receive a calling from God. You understand that's what you were meant to be. You don't do it by living a certain lifestyle. You don't live it by your heart, particularly, although you want a rabbi to have a good heart. You do it by studying, by knowing answers to difficult questions which relate to how a human being should live on earth. Now, we don't assume that every rabbi is wise. We assume they've studied, they've passed very rigorous examinations, and so they're able to answer questions on matters relating to our daily life. I'm fortunate. The rabbi who leads the small Jewish congregation I belong to, who is the age of my nephew, he's a bit older than my own children, but not a great deal, is a very wise man. You notice that when you meet him and you hear from him. But part of his wisdom is he knows what he doesn't know. And we think a wise person is always going to be someone who knows that it's not a game. We're not in a quiz. We're not on television in a mastermind or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or whatever. And if you know all the answers, you're the winner. What you need to know if you're wise is to know what it is you do not know and not be ashamed to admit it but you do have an understanding of how you can find answers to the questions which bother you in life.
So thank you so
I'm
much.
sorry, I can't go into more depth than that because our moderator won't.
We have a time limitations. Thank you so much, our honorable speakers. Now the next questions from one of Rotarians from Bangladesh and also the banker, Ranjan Barua. He's joining from the Bangladesh. Please ask your questions to our speaker.
Thank you, Venerable Lablu Barua Bante. At first, greetings to our guest speaker, Jeremy Jones. My question is that in our developing country like Bangladesh, how interfaith dialogue will be fruitful as a tool to deal with the incitement to violence and towards reconciliation, where in our country, women and young people have very poor participation in decision making. My question is how interfaith dialogue will be fruitful, where young people and women's participation is very poor in Bangladesh, in a developing country like Bangladesh?
Okay. Again, it's a complex question, and I just want to relate that not that long ago, I'm trying to remember when, it was before Sydney went into our latest long lockdown for the virus. It was Ramadan, and there were a number of iftars. Sorry, Christian, turn off your microphone, please. Could you? Sorry, I was getting a bad echo. I still am.
Speaker.
We can mute the person who asked the thank you. Sorry, it was very difficult. I was getting the feedback. I want to say, during Ramadan, I went to an iftar of the Bangladeshi community in Sydney. And they're mainly, it just turned out this particular group were associated with the Awami League political group within Bangladesh. But it was very unusual for them. It was the first time ever to have an interfaith session as part of their iftar. And there was a Catholic priest, a Hindu, and myself as 3 guests to be part of that discussion. And they had that, most of them, I must tell you, in Australia, they are professionals. To come from Bangladesh to Australia, you generally have high qualifications. They were learned, educated people, but they were not exposed to the concept of finding people from other religions having something valuable to contribute. But we had the session, we had the discussion, and they all said their eyes were being opened to ideas of which they were not aware. They were learning from this sort of dialogue. And it was interesting because they found it much easier, and many people find it easier to relate to somebody who is not in the same room as them, who might be of a different religion. They can do it across Zoom more easily than talking to the person who is in the same shop as they are, where there's integrated communities. Sometimes it might need to come from the outside to have an impact inside, depending on the circumstances. But you see, it isn't, also it's not for everybody. We do not have a world where every religious leader by any means supports interfaith dialogue or is good at it. You need to have the right personality. You need to have the right mentality. And it can take time to develop and grow. But what we have seen is 40 years ago or less, in many Western countries, interfaith dialogue was very unusual, even between Jews and Christians. 20 years ago, interfaith dialogue anywhere in the world was quite rare between Muslims and Christians or Jews and Christians. It happened, but it was rare. As time has gone on, there's been a growing constellation of groups in local situations and regional and global who are involved in interfaith dialogue, and has had effect. I mentioned the tsunamis. I could have mentioned work against AIDS in New Guinea, where interfaith work, which was brought in a sense from the outside. They would not have had interfaith dialogue without people in other countries having dialogue, which could then be brought into their context, imported in a sense to help. It helped, and these are long-term projects, but I think that's what we can ask for. But when it comes to Bangladesh, again, it's going to be a matter at this stage of people doing what they can. If you think from, if any school, any university develops a dialogue with people in another country of a different faith, you're starting a conversation, you're moving the conversation away from saying it's a waste of time, there's no value in having this sort of dialogue. When it comes to the big questions of reconciliation, you have to think about, well, where are the forces of good going to be against the forces of bad? Where are you going to find them? Are they all going to be in your faith, or are you going to have to work with people of other faiths? Are you going to be the brave one? It's very difficult in many circumstances to be the first. I mean, I know when I was one of the earliest people in my country to be involved publicly in dialogue with some religions. And if my photo appeared in a newspaper with some people, I was told I was with the enemy. You know, I was a traitor. What am I doing? Now, a few years later, everybody wanted to be in those photos because it's there's a certain logic to say that human beings benefit from learning from others and working with others more than you benefit by being in hostile relationships and having hostile engagements with other parts of humanity. And I'm sorry I can't bring you more joy than that in my answer, but I think that is really the best assessment I can make of the situation.
Yeah, thank you so much, our honorable speakers, and also our honorable bankers and Rotary and Ranjan Barua for his wonderful questions. We'll be take only one more questions, and then we'll be take one comment from our venerables, and also we'll be read one of the comments. So 3, and within 5 minutes we'll be finish this session. Then we'll be our next will be announcements. So the next questions come from our venerable Dhammarakkhita. He is a doctorate from the Mahachulalangkan Buddhist University. Please, our Dr. Dhammarakkhita, could you kindly ask the questions to our honorable speaker now? Hello? Hello? Venerable Dhammarakkhita, can you hear me? Hello? So I think we have an internet problem. Maybe you have internet problems. So we are going to the next comments. Our venerable Sumananda, because you want to make one comment, please make your comment.
So thank you very much. Again, I would like to greetings from India, each and everyone. Actually, I would like to sharing with that. We are ultimately the responsible what is the happening around with us in the globally. So certainly in the many happen, you know, in the Asian or other country. One question from about interfaith from Cambodia. She said about the religion, the interfaith on the religions, and also she gives some background according of the Buddhist tradition. So actually, the purpose of the religions is to guide to the mankind to and develop the unity and harmonious life, and to cultivate the human qualities and mental purity. So, however, religion is the being used to discriminate against others' religions and to develop jealousy and or the hostility. So, actually, the people are not using religion to maintain peace, but to disturb and hate others. So this unhealthy religious arrogance and competition have been created violence and bloodshed in many parts of the world. We see the industry, the name of the religions, they have a lot of work in the past or the previous time. So at the same time, while they're sharing their own imagination and concept as a real belief, as a part of their valuable culture and or the tradition, some religionists ridicule the culture and tradition of the others in their beliefs and practice, which they introduce as their only true religion. So they promote selfish ideas for material gain, political power, and self-glorification. So actually, what is the begin? Everything is begin from the human mind. Like as a peace is also begin from the human mind, the word also is begin from the human mind. So to the best of my knowledge, and I do believe that what is the happening here and right now, everything for the responsible of our human intelligence, because we are shaped by our thought. So when we become what we think we become, then when our mind is the pure and joyful, it means we need to be developed to our mental thought or mental cultivation. Then we can overcome from some of this obstacle or uncertainty or what is the unexpected things that appears around us, even in personal life, in the family life, in our society, in the country, in the globally. So this is I like to just sharing with you that because the intelligence is always responsible for what is happening in the society, politically, religiously, or any culturally, because the all major problems for which are whose we are responsible and which affect us directly, and we also create some others which divide mankind and create problems such as the racial arrogance and some of the religious fanaticism and cultural and traditional discrimination, language problem, and color war and superiority and inferiority complex in thinking the followers of the others religions as their enemies, and it is to seem to support to the activities of another religion. They never think that.
Thank you so much, our Venerable Somananda. We are very sorry. We are very sorry to disturb you now because our time is very limited. We are sorry for our inconvenience, and we are very sorry. Estably next time we'll be give you the more times and floor. And do we agree with you? All the problems come from our human mind, and human minds create the problems in the individual, then it's going to the society, and then it's going to the country for our hatred, for our delusions, for our discriminations, which is come from our human minds. So thank you so much, the comment for our Venerable Somananda. And the next we'll be read just one comment because when the questions come by the Ranjan Barua, then our Cambodians participant, she wrote that the based on my experience, Bangladeshi women are very smart and strong. They might just need opportunity, contributions in the society, in the world. Because she is working in Bangladesh 5 years and she got a lot of experience from Bangladesh. Thank you so much this comment. Now I'd like to our Natalia to please you can talk, and then we'll be, introduce our next lecturers because we have a next session on the third session on 24th August. Please just first we talk with our Natalia now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Venerable Lablu. I just wanted to thank you and all the participants for this interesting discussion today, and of course of our speaker. And I would like to remind about our next meetings, and the last meeting, which we will take part on the 2nd of September, will be for you to share your perspective and to share your experience. Also, your opinion is important for us because we are creating an exhibition about the Holocaust and Holocaust distortion, lessons for and from Southeast Asia, and it will be translated in several languages, in Khmer, in Thai, and Burmese languages. So, and we would like to meet with you on the 2nd of September, also to learn your perspective, and we would be happy to use your contribution in our exhibition. So please join us also on stay until the end with us. So thank you very much. Thank you. That's all from me.
Yeah, so thank you everyone, honorable speakers, and also our co-founder of the Never Again Associations, Professor Rafals, and also Rotarians, Ranjan Barua, and also all of our participants. Without your participants, these wonderful sessions and this wonderful meeting will be not happens. Because of you, that's why it's happened, and we can make the successful today these sessions. And so we are again grateful, and again we are honored for your presence today in here. Now I would like to tell you again and remind you that our record, because last first meetings, you can got this record in the website of Never Again Associations page. You can go the space, and then you can find there the record, and you can listen whatever you discuss, whatever you share, and whatever you learn from our honorable speakers. So you can find there Never Again Association page, and also you can find in International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance page, and also you can find Holocaust Educations and Genocide Awareness in South and Southeast Asia. This page, Facebook page, you can go these 3 pages, and also I share my from personal page. You can got from the record, and you can listen this again the records. I think it will be helpful for you. So please, Natalia, can you turn off the poster now?
Yes,
Hello?
I did it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, please.
Yeah, please. The picture is in here now.
You can see it now. I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, please. Can you turn up your screen? This one. Photo share. Can you close it now? Hello. So I have to make conclusions, and before finish and before going, please turn off your camera, and we'll be take the group pictures, and which will be post on our Facebook page, and you can see your Facebook page also. So please turn off your camera and take the picture, group picture for us. And before going to the close, I'll be make as a moderators. I'll be take some keynote from our honorable speaker. I am very delighted and I am very honored. Actually, this is a very tough for me to make a summarize about this his lectures. He's a wonderful expert and very expert, very expert, and also you have a very good interfaith relationships with other religions. So it is I am very small about my knowledge, because you have vast knowledge. So it is very difficult for me to make summarize his lectures today. Just a few words I just write in my papers in here, which is for share with you. And mostly he today discuss about the some of the concept too much, which is called about the powers and economy, because all of the things, all of the conflict, all of the genocide, and all of the Holocaust happened from some reasons. First reason is the politics and powers, and also the discriminations, and also the injustice or social inequality or social disadvantage from its happenings, and also to be the power. Mostly he emphasized with the power of politics, power of natural resource, and power of many things. And also he explained about his personal life history when he discussed about the Holocaust and genocide. And second, he emphasized on the justice and record and documentations, because what is happening, all the genocide, Holocaust, and what is going every day, some of the record is not is secret. We cannot open it. So and we cannot share it. So Holocaust remembrance, that means we can share, we can get the chance to learn the history from our generations by the generations. Like as Bangladesh independence, genocide, we can learning from our generation by generation, and Cambodian genocide, they can learning by learning from their generation. But all the time, some of the people misrecord from their own benefit, from their own perspectives, to be give the false statement or give the false documentations. So record is most important in one of the things to protect genocide and protect the Holocaust. And also he discussed about the reconciliations. Most important, he mentioned about the reconciliations, educations, and common good, common understandings, and create the interfaith dialogue to make one's self and unconditional love, compassion. Without unconditional love, compassion, and oneness, there will be not happen peace in our society. So most important, so unconditional love without defilements, without any attachment, and without any hatred, delusions, and to over greediness. So I think this is the most important lesson we learned from him. and also the very personal experience. And my personal experience when I have been in Poland and also in Germany, and I saw that how the Holocaust happens in there. Still, when I remember this museum and also this motto of theirs, I feel cry, because that times more than 6 million people killed by the Nazi Bahini, which is also come from of the human mind. And also they killed the LGBT, because everybody have a freedom to choose their own right. But from our political gain, from our resource, from our own benefit, we try to be we try to be distorted, or we try to be not offering to the rights to others, because we are trying to feel we are the one supermans in the world. So we are not the super in the world, human beings, all of our equals, and we will respect the diversity, and we will be accept all others people life. So it will be make our life as a peaceful without conflict, and to give the rights and trust and give the faith other religious also, and share from your heart to heart. If you have a heart to heart with the deep listening from others suffer, I think it will make you reduce your suffer from your life. So thank you so much again to join our these wonderful sessions, and I hope that you will be learn lot of things upcoming our next 2 sessions, and every day you will be learn lot of things, and lot of things will be carry in your lives, which will be helpful for your life to be live in a peaceful way. Thank you so much again, and I hope you will be joined with us in the next 2 meeting on 24 August and 2nd of September with our honorable speaker Helena, and he will be give the wonderful lectures. He have a wonderful, very vast knowledge about Buddhisms and Holocaust, and also the how Buddhism think about the Holocaust, because he was born as a Jewish family, then he learned to the Buddhisms, and he converted as a practice as a Buddhist. So, and he have a wonderful books. He wrote the wonderful books. I think you can share on the next 2 books, and his book is in here already. You can see these books, and I think you can learn a lot of things from the next session. Thank you so much again, and also again invite you to join our next sessions. Now we'll be take one of the group picture. I think we can give the good a smile for everyone, and it will be make you happy, and a smile and take pictures and go your home and live at this COVID time happily and peacefully without any difficulties.